Ho! What's up? Time for another episode where I attempt to class up the place. Beer can hat, red bow tie, America's shirt, Jim Beam fanny pack, and jorts. Merca. Why? Bourbon. That's why. The great American spirit. Let's talk about it. Where's the name come from? From the Bourbon family. It's a French dynasty. Is that why it's called bourbon? No. That's why things in America were called bourbon, i.e. Bourbon County, Bourbon Street, New Orleans. Why is this called bourbon? One of those two. Conflicting ideas say which reason, but most likely Bourbon Street, New Orleans, biggest port. It's where they sold this stuff off the ships for cheap. So it became bourbon whiskey because it was sold on Bourbon Street, even though it wasn't made in New Orleans. Check. Good. Moving on. All right, so let's get into what bourbon is. Bourbon. 6 rules. 1. Needs to be made in the greatest country on earth, the United States of America. It can be made in any state. People say it can only be made in Kentucky. Misnomer. It can be made in any state. Has to say the state of distillation on the label. 2. Has to have a grain bill that is 51% corn. The other 49% can be high rye. It can be high wheat. Doesn't matter, but it's the only whiskey that says it has to be 51% corn. 3. Has to be aged in brand new oak charred barrels. Once it's used once, that barrel is sent off and it can be used for tequila, rum, scotch, whatever. But a barrel can only be used for bourbon one time when it's a virgin barrel. That's also where it gets this beautiful color. 4, it needs to be distilled no greater than 160 proof. 5, it has to be entered into the aging process barrel at no greater than 125 proof. And 6, it needs to be bottled at no less than 80 proof or 40% alcohol. That is a bourbon. Next question. Moving on. Okay, now let's talk about some of the other words you might find on a beautiful bottle of bourbon, like Jefferson Ocean right here. Starting at the bottom, Jefferson Ocean, aged at sea. What does that mean? Absolutely nothing as far as bourbon is concerned. Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. What does that mean? Kentucky, state of distillation. Straight bourbon whiskey. There is no stipulation on how long a bourbon needs to be aged in the barrel to be called a bourbon. What there is a specification on is when you can use the terms straight bourbon whiskey. It needs to be aged at least 2 years to be a straight bourbon whiskey, and if it's aged 4 years or less, it has to have the amount of years of distillation on there. So it'll say 2 or 3 if it's less than 4 years. Greater than 4 years, no requirement to write the age on there at all. However, if it does, like this bad boy right here that says age 9 years, it means that the youngest drop of bourbon in this bottle is 9 years. It has to be curtailed to the youngest drop of bourbon. Bourbon. Any questions? Moving on. Now you may have been looking at this beautiful thing right here the whole time I'm talking. Well, I'm going to open it up and show you what beauty lies inside while we discuss a little bit about why bourbon is so prominent and around today. Any good bourbon drinker knows exactly what this is. Pappy Van Winkle is pretty much the creme de la creme of bourbons. Now made by the Buffalo Trace Distillery that is in Kentucky. Buffalo Trace is one of the few distilleries that never closed. So let's talk about that. Bourbon, been around since the 18th century. It's been being made since the 18th century, but they took a big hit during Prohibition. Most distilleries closed during Prohibition for obvious reasons. Some got a license to stay open because they marketed themselves as medicine. What a time to be alive. So Buffalo Trace, being one of those, under a different name, has been around as long as they've been making bourbon. So I hope you enjoyed this wonderful expose on what bourbon is, where it came from, and why it's the greatest thing known to man. And as I sit here and enjoy this little bit of Pappy Van Winkle I poured for myself, please take some time to like, comment, subscribe, share this, send it to your friends, and don't forget to tell me things that you want to hear that can help you become the most classy version of yourself, much like this topic we did here today. Cheers. Stay classy, my friends.